event. Thank you. Welcome to this evening's event with Mindfulness Wales. There's a few of the trustees here this evening. You may recognise some of them. Vishwapani, Heather, Gwennon, and Chris is here, I think. We've also got Liz joining us a bit later on. I'm Rob Callen-Davies. I'm also a trustee with Mindfulness Wales, but I will also be a speaker this evening as well, and talking a little bit about the work that we've done. So just to start with the first few minutes, we're just going to take a moment, perhaps do a short, brief mindfulness practice and just allow ourselves to arrive and settle, and just let other people arrive as well and join us as they come into this space. So just inviting you to settle wherever you are, settling into your chair, getting the feet onto the floor if that's possible. And if you want to close your eyes or lower your gaze, then inviting you to do that as well. Just having a sense of that connection we've just seen as people have arrived, maybe familiar faces, people that we're connected or networked with. Just for a moment, come into the body and feeling that connection with the body, with the soles of the feet on the ground, that connection to the earth beneath our feet, wherever we are. My personal connection to the earth is here in Wales. That's where I'm located at the moment. But just connecting to the earth wherever you are. Recognizing perhaps that we share that sense of connection wherever we are. Certainly my part of Wales has a rich history and a rich biodiversity. Rivers, hills, connection to the sea. Connection to natural resource. Plenty of water. Perhaps connecting the space around us as well. The space in the room, the air, that also connects us wherever we are. Maybe a sense of light coming through half-opened eyes or through eyelids. Sense that connection to each other. So we just allow ourselves to settle into this space. Each bringing with us a knowledge and interest, a curiosity. A willingness to explore. Just sitting with that for a moment. what's brought us here today, this evening. What are we open to? What might we share? Now slowly just beginning to expand out back into this space, this virtual connection that we currently have. Maybe gently opening the eyes and just noticing faces, perhaps on the screen in front of us. Maybe glancing around if you've got the right gallery view. Be noticing faces that we connect with, ones that we are networked to, or we met before, perhaps have a history with. And then moving more fully into this engagement this evening. We're going to move forward with our agenda. I think the first person to speak this evening and just do an overview of the session is Becca. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Becca, and take the spotlight.
Yeah, deal. Well, thank you, and so lovely to be here with you all. Really delighted to look at the screen and see familiar faces, both from in Wales and outside. It's really lovely to have you all here, and yeah, delighted to be here with dear colleagues, with Dean and Alesha and Rob, sharing work that we're really representing a bigger group of colleagues who have been engaged in this exploration together, both from this side of the pond and also from America, colleagues who have all in one way or another been involved in initiatives with people of colour to support capacity building in the mindfulness-based teaching context. And we came together to share our experiences, and I'd already been exploring kind of curriculum themes around MBSR and how the curriculum can be really reclaim its original vision around social engagement, and that this really sort of meshed with the conversations that we were having in this group, and it took a life of its own and became a really such a powerful learning experience for me, and I, you know, the others will speak for themselves, but I know that that's true for them also. Tender and vulnerable making, but also really enriching process that we engaged in, and the paper and the resources that we'll explore tonight with you were one outcome from that, and we're still meeting as a group and still learning and exploring together. So that's the main piece for this evening, but wanted to also, as we begin the session, to just share with you a couple of other projects that are in the same territory, just in a very light touch way. Project that Rob is leading, and a project that our colleague Pauline Gibbs, who unfortunately was going to be here but isn't able to be here, so I'll speak to her, the project she's building around diversity and inclusion. And yeah, just to give you a sense of sort of some of the territory that we're really pivoting towards in our work at Bangor and with colleagues collectively. And you know, these themes are really alive for so many of us. And we were just speaking as we came into the space. This paper is published in Global Advances in Health and Medicine, and it has become the second most read paper in the journal in the last 6 months, which I think really speaks about the sort of zeitgeist of this moment and how these themes, which are old themes, you know, they're hundreds of years old, but they're having attraction in a way that I think has huge potency and potential. And so I just really feel like the time is right for us to take hold of these themes in new ways. So we really hope that there will be space in the second part of the session and this is really our main aspiration for this session, is that we can move into dialogue and conversation together around the themes that this paper throws up, and how it's touching you, and how we can, how we, you know, what can each of us do, you know, in the realms that we're connected with in our own lives to contribute to a bigger vision around inclusivity and social engagement. And yeah, lovely to bring this theme into the Welsh context. I know you're not all from Wales, but you know, this is Mindfulness Wales, and a huge gratitude to Mindfulness Wales for hosting us. But I think it's really interesting, and it'd be lovely to hear your perspectives on this. But Wales knows something about marginalisation and colonialism, and it's, you know, it's interesting to explore these themes in this context. And I guess what the other sort of thing to say is that we particularly and deliberately focused on race as one example of oppression, marginalisation, exclusion, but really recognising that there's many other ways that these themes show up. But we're foregrounding race because that was the experience in the space. That's the expertise that Dean and Alesha and others came with, and that was the choice that we made as a team in our equality, diversity, inclusion group, was that was the most stark underrepresentation that we had, and we have to start somewhere with moving it to a more inclusive space. But it's clearly, like lots of other work, needs to happen as well as work around race. But that's what we're foregrounding in this evening's exploration. So yeah, so we're going to hear from each of us, from Rob, from myself, from Alesha and Dean, just a kind of a more personal introduction around how this process and journey has been for each of us. And maybe I could hand over to Dean or Alesha so that your voices come into the space before we move too far into the session. So yeah, whichever of you would like to go first.
Oh, thank you, Becca. Dean and I are kind of looking at each other and nudging each other. We're right next to each other. Yeah, really, really wonderful to be here, and just welcome to everyone, and thank you for making this space. It can be really challenging, but I think when people can show up, we can at least start somewhere. You know, we can look each other, even if it's across the screen, roughly into each other's eyes, and know that we're here as human beings. And I think that's the best place that we can start, here as human beings. I'm here in London, East London, Newham, one of the most diverse boroughs in the country, and some say the world, actually, because every third person apparently could literally be from somewhere else on Earth, from somewhere on Earth. Sorry, I couldn't say that very well. But it's really interesting to be exploring in connection and in community, and knowing that we are stepping into a particularly Welsh community. And as Rebecca already mentioned, there is an awareness about marginalization. There is an awareness of underrepresentation that kind of speaks to some of the themes that came up in the paper. So I'm really looking forward to any kind of dialogue and questioning around this. And also to say, we don't have the answers for everything. We are still feeling it out ourselves, but we can only bring our lived experiences and our own contemplations to this subject as best we can, and really invite others to also start from wherever you are. Because if there's interest, at least we know that there is some compassion for ourselves as human beings. And it feels like this is a real pivotal time actually within the mindfulness field, because it feels as if, this is my own reflection here, and something that Dean and I both speak about, but there's a sense of this is an opportunity for mindfulness to step into its maturity. We can, get the basics of mindfulness, and hopefully we all have a grasp of that, but really start to open out and really see where perhaps there are boundaries, blockages, areas that we are really curious about, or maybe parts of us that are a little bit scary, things that we experience, and really see if it's possible to allow our mindfulness practice to open up, to explore, to discover with a real sense of humility. I think that's the biggest invitation. And this is something that was really practiced within the group. We created a space that was really welcoming, and we gradually built up that trust to say we can go there, we can look, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, and bring a little bit more of the discussion into our everyday lives. So that felt like a space that opened up trust, trust that we could be vulnerable, trust that we could explore things together, and also trust that it's okay to not know. So that feels really still something that's really stayed with me, and this idea of sharing space, sharing power, sharing and being curious about not only our own conditioning, but perhaps what we think we can do to maybe learn and unlearn if it feels useful for us. So this is a space that's still opening up for me, and I've seen in some of the different networks that we are kind of connected with, some of us, it's really interesting how conversations are happening, and this is brilliant, really brilliant to see. And there's a long path to tread but it feels really important that at least we are willing to look and step together. So yeah, just thank you for having me. I'll maybe hand over to you, Dee.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you for the introduction and invitation to share, Rebecca. And yeah, just so glad to be here with you all, sharing in what we kind of describing as the sort of unfolding and flourishing of our mindfulness practice into or across boundaries that, or superficial boundaries actually, and including our sort of identities. But yeah, it's been so valuable to come together and actually look and spend some time to look at the issues of identity-based harm and race particularly, but certainly identity-based harm in a broader sense as well. Being aware of that whilst looking at race has just been a magical experience, cross-culturally as well, and sort of cross-racially. I think it's been super valuable. Yeah, one of the things that I've learned from the experience of putting this, being part of the team that put the paper together, is really the value of of each of our uniqueness, and how that everyone has agency. So just finding room and finding space for each of us to have a voice and have a space and be validated, recognized, heard. And that's just been really important and special. Providing space, coming forward with also deep humility. It's been, just amazing to hear us sometimes as a group when we were writing, we'd come up with something and suggest an idea, but really aware that that might be coming from our social or cultural conditioning, our habitual ways of being, and that honesty just allowed a deep sense of humility that just invited a real sense of connection that I think is transformational, not just personally, but also collectively. And yeah, my hope and wish is that that sense of transformation flows out to the wider mindfulness world and community. And, they always say about mindfulness having these two wings that they talk about, the mindfulness practice and the compassion. And yeah, I think that this is really about the compassionate side of mindfulness coming to the forefront, and holding that attention and that awareness that we've cultivated through our mindfulness practice in a way that allows our mindfulness practice to be present and stay with all things. So just again, just really deep sense of gratitude for being here and the opportunity to share with the Welsh community, which I think is really important. And there's some faces and names that I can see. So I think the Welsh connection is really strong and potent with that sense of solidarity, that sense of community, that sense of inclusion, and long may that continue. Thank you.
Rob, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah,
Not-
I will, yeah. Hi, so I'm Rob Callen-Davies, and I'm part of the Mindfulness Wales trustee board, but I also work at Bangor on a master's research project with Becca and others. And I work within the NHS in Aneurin Bevan in Gwent in South Wales. My experience, I guess, of being invited to join the group that brought the paper together. I think, well, initially I thought I was there to be the research person, I guess. Or I think Dean has referred to me occasionally as a reference ninja, I think was the term he used in. But I guess my experience of being part of that space as well has been it's been really interesting for me. And I think in terms of reflecting on my own prejudices, my own experiences, I guess, that I had as I've grown. And also, I guess, in terms of what I've done with some of that reflection in terms of mindfulness practice, but also kind of reading and looking at videos, etc., on popular social media platforms. I'm not sure if you name them on you if we're recording. Has been interesting learning for me as well. I think Alesha and Dean covered quite a lot of the things that I really enjoyed, and I think particularly when working on something collectively and looking to produce something as a collective group. That was a really, really good experience for me, and that was particularly what I enjoyed. But apart from obviously meeting you all as well, and there are quite a few people who are not here today, so it's a much bigger group. I think I'll hand back to you, Rebecca. So I'm up next as well. So
yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I think the theme that I wanted to share in this space was sort of, in a way, how my own personal journey into mindfulness and the journey of leading the Centre for Mindfulness at Bangor, how they've kind of mirrored this process of really starting quite close in around personal suffering. That's what pulled me into practice. And as an NHS clinician, when I moved into the university 20 years ago, before that I'd been an occupational therapist working in community mental health in North Wales, and was really taken with the work that Mark Williams was doing at Bangor University around mindfulness and depression, and got linked with that because it brought together my professional engagement as a clinician with my personal engagement with mindfulness. And how that journey then evolved, and our passion in the early years of the centre was very much about getting mindfulness into the NHS, and I really, there was definitely, for me, the NHS was kind of in my blood, and I just really had that passion around making the work that we were doing accessible, just really seeing how beneficial it was to people. But I look back and really recognise that I was very much operating from this sort of sense of individualism. This was very much about how each of us could find mindfulness and explore our own personal processes within our own being. And it really helped to do that in groups. I saw that sort of collective process that happened in groups, but somehow the group process, I don't think didn't really see it as being harnessed in the interest of social engagement at that point. And I, so it's been an opening for me to sort of to gradually see the potential. it wasn't, I mean, I certainly inspired by John's big vision for mindfulness, but actually the reality of how we were engaging with it in the mainstream didn't capture that big vision. So it's been it's really been in the last 5 years that I've done a lot more personal work around my own understanding, my own identity and what I'm bringing, and how that's influencing how I'm shaping things, and how that's influencing how we're collectively shaping things, and really seeing how much more potency there is available for the practice and for what we're doing when we step out and hold this bigger vision. And you know when we're looking, for example, at MBCT for depression, which is such an exquisite program, such a beautiful analysis of how depression unfolds within an individual, but I also see how it's missing the piece around social, how low mood is not created solely within an individual, it's socially created. And we see that in Wales, where there's some of the areas where the highest level of prescribing of antidepressants is in some of the valleys in South Wales, and that's not, that's a social phenomenon. It's not an individual phenomenon. And so just really recognizing that we needed to somehow reclaim this bigger vision, and so this exploration has been happening for us as a group in Bangor over a number of years, and for many, doing our own personal work around this, but also really seeing how we can more collectively engage with this. And I completely honor the work that's happened in other spaces over a long period of time. That's really, so the Mindfulness and Social Change Network and other writers who were critiquing mainstream mindfulness in ways that I found quite troubling and difficult at times, but actually really see how that's been helpful in stirring the pot and helping us to see, me personally, but us collectively, see some blind spots and see some potentials and opportunities that we're missing. And I actually really feel that in Wales that the work, for example, that the mindfulness in Wales, the Mindfulness Wales is doing, is really, has this aspiration to connect at a social level. But I think we're all at the frontier of what we know around how to do this, and we need each other to help us to build understanding of how to lift the practice into this level where it really has potency at a social level. So it's really good to be in the mix of exploring this with you. And I'm a baby in this territory, but I'm glad to be here and learning and exploring with you all. Yeah. So back to you, Rob, to just share around the project that you're leading, the research that you're.
Yeah, thanks, Becca. And certainly, I think Dean and Alesha and Becca have already touched on quite a lot of what is kind of involved in this particular project. I've got 5 minutes, so it's going to be quite brief. But in terms of the research that we're kind of doing, I say we, myself, Becca and some others are doing is around mindfulness-based programs and bigger than self issues. And I guess that really comes out of what Becca said, is looking at kind of the historic evidence base being for mindfulness-based programs for individual concerns. Becca touched on depression, anxiety, other health conditions, but the evidence base is built. And then this emerging trend that seemed to be appearing around mindfulness-based programs and links to social change. So the scoping review that we're currently involved in is looking at what the current empirical evidence is out there, bringing it together, looking at what research and practice has happened already related to mindfulness-based programs and social change, and then what are the outcomes how do they compare, contrast across different types of research studies that have taken place. We're also looking to investigate things like mechanisms and potential mechanisms that also influence social change. So I guess we're looking in those areas that were touched on of agency, of pro-social attitudes or pro-social behaviours, things like cooperation, some of the interpersonal effects or changes that mindfulness-based programs are kind of measuring and reporting on. So what are those characteristics, the quality, the design, the tools for measuring outcomes is part of that project as well. And then also looking at the kind of populations. So we're looking at it through an equity lens as well, although scoping reviews don't necessarily usually use an equity lens, but we're looking at kind of how those papers are reporting and just looking at that through an equity lens. So we're kind of at a point where the papers are gathered, the data is extracted, and we're writing that up now into a set of results, which will be split across probably looking at children and adolescents in a slightly kind of one kind of reporting context, and adults in the other. But as I said, looking across those inner capacities as well. So what mindfulness programs, what are they telling us about the development, the nurturing of our own inner capacities? So I guess in terms of the results, we would hope to, I guess, pull that together and put it out into the world in the next few months. So I think we're hoping to come back. I think this was advertised as part 1, wasn't it? And do part 2, which would be reporting on the findings of that particular piece of research, and hopefully to the same group or to a very similar group to the one that's here tonight. I think that's a brief overview.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And I put in the chat the protocol for the scoping review that really talks about the plan for that research. And hats off to Rob. I mean, it's a hugely complex piece of work that he is engaged in here, of really mapping. Is it 120 something papers that we've narrowed down to, that all report on this mindfulness for what we're calling bigger than self concerns, that not to do with the individual, essentially, not to do with personal well-being, personal performance, but to do with the collective. And it, I think one of the things that I really felt in wanting to understand this territory more was that we need to understand what the research is saying so far, but it's really quite confusing, because there's what as Rob is really mapping, there's a lot of data out there, lots of individual papers, but it, as a body of work, it's quite disparate and hard to make sense of. And so this is what Rob is just doing incredible service for all of us in gathering that in a way that I hope will help it be digestible for all of us. And so we can take a look at, what the research is saying and actually know how to build on this, so that as a collective, we can see what's needed to help us build our understanding in these areas. Yeah, so I want to share with you research that Pauline Gibbs is leading. So both of these research projects are funded by Knowledge Exchange scholarship funding, European funding. It's a poignant thing to say. So the one that Rob is working on is funded as a collaboration with the Mindfulness Initiative. So we'll really go into informing their ongoing work around policy engagement. And this is the space that they're really working in. It really links with their recent report around climate action. And so that's a piece of work that's in collaboration with them. The work that Pauline is working on is in collaboration with the Mindfulness Network. And the title of the project that she came up with, I'll put in the chat, is Making Space for Hidden Voices in Mindfulness-Based Programs. Sawubona, we see you. And Pauline was really keen to include this Sawubona Do you use this in your work, Dean and Aisha? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. It's a really friendly, welcoming way that really says, I see you as a human being. It's also quite similar to Ubuntu, but yeah, it's very, very welcoming. It's a real heart space connection. So yeah, it feels important. I'm glad she's included it.
Yeah. So I'm just reading Pauline's words here from the project. She speaks about strengthening Sawubona seeing involves resisting participation in the dehumanizing dynamics of oppression and engaging intentionally in the liberation of ourselves and others. Once we see, we then have the responsibility to live in alignment with our seeing. Yeah. So the work that Pauline is engaged in is really you sort of collaborating with the Mindfulness Network. There's a bit of text that I put in that just summarizes the sort of main aims of her research, which is in a way to use the Mindfulness Network as a sort of test site for looking at how we can engage in equality, diversity, inclusion work, in terms of looking at systemically at how might systemic structures of oppression play out within the way we structure our organization, the way we hold our teaching spaces, and how might we address that? What pedagogical approaches might we use and adopt that would create more inclusive, more democratic spaces where people can bring the fullness of their whole beings into those spaces? And what would an anti-oppression lens, how would that influence the way that we shape our training programs? So these are the themes that she's really exploring with us, and a huge gratitude to her for that work. And again, our intention is to come back sometime next year and to share with you the unfolding of that work. Okay, but this evening our main focus is to share with you this paper that we wrote, MBSR for Our Times. And although we asked that you might read the paper, we're sort of thinking it'd be really helpful just to bring it live into the space. And so Dean and Aisha are just going to give a kind of high-level sort of overview of the paper to bring it into us this space now.
Thank you, Becca, and thank you, Rob, as well. Really, really useful to know that this research is happening. I really first want to acknowledge that, because in the field, there is definitely holes and gaps that feel like there's so much that could be poured into them. So I'm really grateful that this is being done, and it's quite exciting actually to know that other people will benefit as a result, including us that's already here in the field. So I'm really, really grateful for this. I'm going to give a really brief overview of the actual paper, and then I'll hand over to Dean afterwards to reflect on the resources. So there's two papers that came together, and I'm really pleased that that was an option for us, because the paper itself is obviously very academic. I must say, not always my preference. Sorry, Rob, sorry, all the academics in the space, but I do really appreciate that we're taking care of different positions of communication, and that feels really important to make it more accessible. So whilst it's really necessary to have an academic understanding, I also feel like when we're in the classroom, when we're on the street, when we're in our family homes, etc., there is something that feels like we can just dip into and kind of get a sense of. So it really brings across the essence. So I really am really pleased that this has been an opportunity that means that we can write and also express in different ways. For those of you who haven't had the opportunity to read either the paper or the resources, please do. I invite you to do that at some point. You know, they are worthwhile either dipping into or taking in their fullness and entirety. But just to give an overview, first of all, going over some of the other information in just a moment, I really want to recognize the other authors that aren't here with us today, but in total, I believe it's 11 of us. So we have Bridget, Beth, Pauline, who's already been mentioned, Becca, who's here as well, Zayda, Michael, Noriko, Nana Karantama, Rob, who's here, and myself and Dean. So it was a real diverse group of people that came together. And that was really apparent in the space and on Zoom. Most of them we haven't met in person, so it's really interesting. But it really feels important to acknowledge everyone, because everyone really brought something different, their own lived experience, as well as their expertise, and poured it into the paper so that we could reflect in different ways, get a sense of our own positionality, our standpoints, and also maybe what feels worthwhile exploring because we maybe feel vulnerable, or because there is a sense of curiosity that can strengthen the field when we explore these things collectively. So as Becca mentioned earlier, we came from two sides of the Atlantic, and that felt really important to acknowledge how different contexts, because whilst we're in spaces that are teaching or facilitating mindfulness based programs, who comes to these sessions do actually bring a life force of their own to the groups. So really acknowledging who's in the spaces feels really important, with a real sense of welcoming, and we were able to do that together as well. And that really spoke to the diversity, not just racially, culturally, and around our heritages, but also the communities and the intersections that wove into that. So it was really interesting to explore that in an open way, in a curious way, and really respect the wisdom that came with that. So that was one of the core things that we thought was really important, to be able to open up and really focus on one area, just one area, because we can easily go off and, you know, become pulled into different directions, but really see if we could stay focused. And that was really quite illuminating for us. But what that really spoke to was the anti-oppression aspect of this work. So whilst we were focusing on race, there's a much bigger lens that we could also look through, but it felt worthwhile just staying there for this paper. And this is important because of the work that we are doing. We're all involved in different types of initiatives, and also maybe different establishments as well, including training and research, as already mentioned. And this is on a global level. So that also speaks to the wide volume of people that are accessing mindfulness. Also, to just point out, to really frame that we focus on MBSR, that felt really important. Because this is one of the first programs that was brought into mainstream exploration, and to really acknowledge actually where and how it was developed with Jon Kabat-Zinn's visions in mind, and really honor that work, you know, because whilst we're here discussing MBSR and, you know, maybe some of the critiques of it, we also really recognize the amount that people have already benefited from that program, and its introduction as a public health intervention to enable engagement on both an individual and also systemic and organizational shift level. That was how it was born. So it really gave us an opportunity to kind of join up some of those dots and come back to that. But what we are really aware of in its growth, a lot of the practice trends and also research have really prioritized the individual well-being. So this felt like it was an opportunity to really look at some of the societal points that could be included in the practice. So I'm going to give you a really quick critique, recognizing some of the critiques and tensions that we spoke of and explored together. The biggest elephant in the room was the population. Who's participating in teaching mindfulness and also practicing mindfulness? You know, predominantly it's mainly those racialized as white, middle class, and normally female. This was really interesting, and I still find it interesting, but I think it's useful to voice and acknowledge, because there must be some structural disadvantages that have led to this. So how has this happened? Is there a sense of suffering that speaks to a certain demographic? Is it because who is teaching, who is seen as professionals, etc.? So many questions arise with this seeing and knowing. So this really enables us to start to unpack and really see, okay, so society also has an impact in the mindfulness space. So we acknowledged together, and this paper really tries to do this in a way that's sensitive, that understands that patterns of identity-based harm and oppression are not exempt from the mindfulness field. They are living and existing systems. As much as we may be advocates for mindfulness, and still are, there are truths there that feel worthwhile speaking to. Those truths that can also create stress, also pain, and discomfort for a lot of people. And I think also has put off a lot of people. So it's worthwhile understanding as we expand our mindfulness practice and also compassion practices to get to some of the roots of some of the issues that we're realizing. So this really enabled us to look at the universal participation and also see what can be done. Where is there maybe a mismatch in society, and really start to hone in on the ethics and the value base of mindfulness. So collectively, we understand that we have a sense of a commitment to non-harm. So in doing so, how are we practicing? What are we including? What are we not including? This feels like something that keeps coming back to us as we explore these themes. What we also recognize is opportunities to move from not just looking at health for the individual, but also mindfulness is often used as for its performative benefits. Actually seeing what happens when we move it to the bigger than self concerns. What happens when we are in relationship? What happens when we are teaching? Do we recognize that when we are teaching, it is a social role? We are not just doing a one-to-one on it with an individual. We are in a social capacity. So how are we relating to ourselves in these spaces, as well as to other people that are in these spaces? And being curious. So really understanding the social aspects from a different perspective and allowing that to rest in the mindful, under a mindfulness gaze. So some of the other tendencies that we saw was drivers for alleviation of stress and depression. Really useful, as already mentioned, but there are so many different aspects to this that mean, you know, stress and depression can also be a result of our societies, not just put onto the individual, which is often something that we find within the mindfulness space. Stress is kind of like reduced down to the individual. But what happens when we say, okay, and be curious as to how it's happened in the first place when we're looking at human distress? And also, it's flourishing. Our sense of flourishing through practice. What are we including here? What do we mean by flourishing? What do we mean by kindness? Is it subjective? So we start to look at the relationships that we have with ourselves, with others, interpersonally, systemically, structurally, etc. So it really does take us through, or what we did with our critiquing, we really went through the different levels and layers of communication, relationship, and where mindfulness fits in those structures, actually. So one of the other aspects of the paper was to look at our aspirations. What are we hoping to achieve by putting this paper together, by reflecting in this way? So one of the biggest things was about widening representation. This is something that Becca and Rob are working at the moment with the research aspect. So really looking at widening the vision, widening who and how we're teaching, researching, participating, etc. Who is in the room? So really being curious about characteristics and identity, and really looking at new ways to encourage equity, because there is a real opportunity for people to learn, people to connect with other people, other groups, other institutions, etc. So how can we make space for others to become more involved? But not just in a way that we are saying, oh yeah, come in here, it's all great, but actually really opening it up and saying, okay, but what is the opportunities that we have here? Who can we really invite into the space, and maybe what can we change? Who can we make space for? Who needs to be at the table? So really trying to widen the vision for mindfulness-based programs, and how we can also flourish within the space. So one of the other aspects of making that safe space for people to come into means broadening how we communicate, how our curriculums are put together. So cultural understandings, the narratives that are being used, the language, discourse, the signs and symbols, as Stuart Hall would say, that deepen the relational, our relational awareness. So really starting to understand, okay, we can communicate in different ways, we can teach in different ways, we can use different poetry. Who are our teachers? Is there a limit? Are we using one type of pool? So really starting to re-examine not only what and how we're teaching, but also maybe what's informing us, and also looking at the themes. So really, this was an opportunity to really explore, how do we embody mindfulness practice? Where are its limitations for us? And maybe where is it really alive for us? And how can we really bring it into society in a way that's useful, in a way that is continuously growing, continuously opening up, and embracing the full diversity of what it is to be human. So really looking at also, uncomfortably sometimes, oppression and power dynamics. Who's in the room? How are we operating? Are there stereotypes that are part of our autopilot that maybe we can start to look at? So really creating spaces that nurture psychological safety as well as a physical safety, so that we can really acknowledge that diversity is a fact. Inclusion is an option, but belonging can be the outcome. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is, but it can be the outcome. So really allowing ourselves that space to explore together. So maybe I'll stop there, because it's really hard to summarize the paper. There is so much in it, but I'm really hoping that others that have read it already continue to read it and reread it and refine and relearn and let go and all the rest of it. So it feels like there are so many different messages and trails of contemplation that we can just rest with. But yeah, I'll hand over to Dean. Dean will talk to you more about the resources that really support the paper and ways to explore it on a practical level. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. And yeah, awesome job. Maybe just taking even a few seconds just to pause and absorb what was shared. Maybe connecting with a deep sense of gratitude for just coming together to explore these topics. So I kind of have been invited to share about the resource paper, right? And the resource paper, I think, is a 40+ pages. So summarizing that in 10 minutes is a bit of a challenge, but hey, let's have a go and see what happens. From my perspective, and I'm really conscious that it was a collective piece of work, so there's many different perspectives and outlooks on how this came together. So this is just one perspective with my humble opinion of what the resource paper is about. But I'd also like to start, because I think sometimes these papers and these new ideas can have a bit of a shock to the system, the nervous system. Oh, have we been doing something wrong? Is there something wrong with MBSR or MBCT or what's been before? And really acknowledging and really taking a moment just to pause and acknowledge that this is not about saying MBSR is broken or MBCT is broken or what has been done was incorrect or wrong. This is about embracing what has been before. And in an African term, we would call that Sankofa, embracing what's been before, building on that, and then bringing forward that knowledge for our current and present moment. So, you know, just to sort of settle any concerns about, things have been done incorrectly or wrongly. That's not my sense of what we're speaking of here. Really, what we're speaking of is a constant unfolding of human knowledge and wisdom as we delve into a subject this we call mindfulness. Yeah, and just also really to honor people like Jon Kabat-Zinn. You know, when I read that book, Full Catastrophe Living, perhaps you've all read it, you know, and I think the title was unsettling for me, Full Catastrophe Living. But actually, I think this is what this is. It's embracing everything, the full catastrophe of our lived experience. And I think that title alone was the invitation to this bigger than self-concern that Kabat-Zinn was always, perhaps, well, certainly when I read the book, and what I took from Kabat-Zinn's work was that it was a bigger than self-concern. So I'm just really kind of excited the fact that we're actually moving into that space, but built on the stability and the focus of some really, really effective programs designed to help people deal with personal challenges such as depression, anxiety, and so forth. You know, but we're in a different time, and we've gone through what the 2 years of COVID has taught the world something. And that is that, you know, we were never gonna get through COVID alone. And we all had to work together to keep each other safe, keep each other alive in some context, you know, and also to collaborate together to find a solution. And I think that lesson isn't going to go away too soon, and perhaps is why, you know, we are more prepared to look at the complexities and of our connections and interconnections in the current moment. I would say also that the resource paper, the accompanying resource paper, which is a huge document, was really born out of this deep aspiration that we all came together collectively with, which was to really catalyze a broader interest, a broader impact of the practice itself. And I think there was 4 key elements. One was widening representation of teachers, trainers, researchers, and participants. But even when we stop there as a group, how might that come to fruition? And allow the teachers to also rest in a space of authenticity. And really what it was inviting us to explore was how we can each bring our own cultural and social and whatever spiritual, that's also not off the table, right? You know, sometimes secular mindfulness, we can remove that off the table, and it's also invited. You know, how can we engage a broader demographic to come into mindfulness with a deep sense of authenticity that doesn't sort of push back, but aligns and supports what's been before. We also talked about widening this vision for MBSR, which has been spoken about, and really capturing this bigger than self-concern endeavor or wish of Kabat-Zinn. And we also really wanted to facilitate that authenticity, is to stimulate new language. And you know, me personally, I didn't learn, well, I started mindfulness through a Buddhist lens. You know, at one point I took refuge. I spent lots of time with the Kagyu lineage, and then I went into an academic area and studied mindfulness as a social science. And that brought in new language that I just didn't, I didn't understand initially. I didn't value, but you know, my social science master's teachers were saying things like epistemology. I couldn't even say the word what, you know, epistemology. And you've got to really understand your standpoint and your epistemology. And that just blew my mind. I spent lots of time trying to spell it. trying to say it, and then trying to research it. And it became so valuable to realize that how we come to know, how we build our knowledge, and how that can be quite constrained in some context to, you know, sort of my original sort of pathway of training was down a real scientific path. I'm an environmental scientist by trade, and that didn't include any culture. Any of my culture, you know, I kind of put that to one side and did all of the academic stuff that I was required of me, but left all of my culture at the door. So we were really keen to try to, in the resource paper, to try to hint at and try to encourage people bringing in their own authentic cultural knowledge and wisdom that allows them to teach from a heart space, as opposed to a head space. If that's making sense. And then we dropped down in the research wanting to communicate the challenges of pedagogy and power, actually, power dynamics. How do we name power dynamics in the room safely without actually blaming and shaming? And that allowed us to access this idea of pedagogy and how and what materials, what are we using? You know, are we using cultural references like Suryo Bona or Ubuntu or Sankofa? Is that okay to use? You know, and really trying to unpack that space to allow that authenticity to come through. So it's been really wonderful in my experience just to start to drop down collectively into how we facilitate authenticity, how we widen the reach and access, how we introduce new language that deepens the practice and allows it to move into that space of social engagement. At the end of that, all of that good stuff, we decided, kind of loosely decided, that there was two elements to this: the explicit curriculum, which really was the material, you know, the practices, the exercises, and then this implicit curriculum, what the teacher is embodying, maybe how they're coming across. Can we purposefully move into a space where we embody the compassion that we want to share with the world? And how important is that? So we danced around implicit, explicit quite a bit, and we grappled and we re-grappled with that. And in the end, actually, we even sort of came to this more fluid understanding of even the implicit and explicit, recognizing that what is implicit in one moment may be necessary to be much more explicit in another or a different context. What is explicit in another context may be useful to just soften it a little bit and allow to become implicit. So there's this dance of both and I think that that's kind of infused in the resource paper, rather than dichotomizing this, you know, it's explicit and implicit or either or, but both and being willing to dance around that space with fluidity, joy, uncertainty, and also, you know, a sense of purpose. And then so when we finally came to, okay, let's try and do this implicit, explicit thing, a part of that, we looked at what is really implicit and what is really explicit. And then we boiled that down to some key components like the relational stance. The relational stance. And I think some of this is woven into the MBI TAC and good practice guidelines, etc. But we explored the relational stance of the teacher. Does the teacher have the ability to kind of connect with the context? And I'm aware of the context here today and sharing with the Welsh community. And a really important teacher and dear friend of mine, we were in a mindfulness class once, and I was asking, you know, there was some chairs in the room, and I was asking, what color is the chair? And it was a blue chair. And I said, yeah, but what color is it in your language? And someone was from Wales and they said glass. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And then I asked the question, then who's right? Is it blue? Well, the rest of the group was saying it was blue. And then this person was saying glass. I said, who's right? And we came to that space of both and. And that's what the resource paper is really inviting us to do, is to enter in that space of both and being able to relate to the context that we're teaching and validate that context. And I think that that's really important as a teacher. And then we talked about embodiment and holding of the group learning space. Can that be warm? Can that be inclusive? And I mean, there's so much more that I could actually say about the resource, but ultimately, it's not a manual. I think that's what we came to conclude. It's not a manual. It's not a sort of formulaic, structured way of saying that things need to be done or should be done. It's just to really stimulate awareness of nuance. And the invitation there is to what is it Parker J. Palmer says, enter the jazz ensemble of mindfulness and be able to dance and move with the context and utilizing the tools that we have as human beings to address and connect in the moment. So, you know, I'm hoping that the resource is something that really stimulates curiosity, stimulates authenticity, provides a tool for teachers to reflect on in community and ask the questions, what is this about? How do we introduce? Is this, you know, useful? And as my original, many years ago, my Buddhist teachers would have said, if it's unuseful, throw it out, you know. But if it's useful, please do, you know, use it and see if it's able to facilitate your own growth and the growth of mindfulness more broadly and the growth of humanity that really just results in our continuation. Because my deepest sense is that this is so important. And if we don't get it right as a human people, our planet is not going to last. And that's how at its deepest level, how important this is for us as human beings to connect cross-culturally with authenticity, vulnerability, humility, and a heap load of wisdom. Because I think we have the capacity as humans to at least make good effort at addressing the situation that we're all facing globally. But yeah, that's a very whistle-stop tour of the resource paper and its general purpose. Thank you.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much, Dean. Thank you so much, Alesha. That's, yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we really wanted to, and I'm really feeling it would be helpful for me to have some just pause time, some digestion space. So really landing into practice together. And I'd like to suggest that you move the body if your body would like to move. That we just begin by taking a stretch. So maybe come to stand and just see what your body would like, and really invite the attention to move into your own being, dropping into the physicality of how things feel just now and moving in any way that makes sense for your body. Maybe there's a stretch needed. And as you move the body, just really see what's resonating within your being on all sorts of levels, on a physical level, emotional level, thoughts that are flowing through after you've been hearing these words from Dean and Alesha, just really taking in the feel of things within your being. And I'm going to just guide a brief practice and then a movement into reflection. So just choosing how you'd like to be. I'm going to stay standing, but if your body would like to come to sit, it won't be more than about just over 5 minutes. So just choosing how you'd like to be. And just allowing the body to settle here, really feeling the way that your body is touching the earth in the place that you're in. Through the soles of your feet, if you're sitting, through your thighs and buttocks. Just feeling the weight of the body here. Landing, settling. And just spreading the attention out and taking in the fullness of your whole body, whole being, from the soles of your feet up to the crown of your head. This living, breathing being. A complete mystery of what it is to be human in this moment. A huge complexity, as well as the simplicity of this moment. It's really allowing yourself to inhabit the feel of things now. And inviting you to shift into a little bit of personal reflection time in a very unpressured way. So just really whatever comes is fine, and not leaning on yourself to come to any conclusions. Just inviting a reflection on what's been stimulated in your learning after listening to, particularly to Dean and Alesha just now, but to all the themes that we've been introducing in the first part of this session around mindfulness for bigger than self concerns. What's alive for you? Concerns, curiosities, wonderings, questions. What's here? Maybe also any wonderings that you have about how you might bring these themes alive in your particular realm, the communities that you're connected with, the work that you're engaged in. How are these themes relevant in the context that you touch in your life? Where are the potentials? And all of this might feel very unformed and fumbly and provisional, and that's fine. Just really letting your reflections be as they are. And in a moment, we'd like to invite you into breakout spaces so that if you choose to, each one of us has the opportunity to give voice to some of what might be on our mind around these themes. To speak and be listened to can be really helpful, just to say things out loud. But of course, it's an invitation. We'll have a short period in breakout rooms, and then we'll move back into the full group for some dialogue as a full group. And the invitation in the breakout rooms is to give a space, probably about a minute, to each person to speak. And so listening to each person speak and then having some dialogue together as a small group. If you prefer not to go into a breakout room, just stay in the main space, and then you'll be able to just rejoin the full group when everybody comes back from the breakout rooms. So just now, just coming back to your chair, to the screen. And Vishwapani will arrange the breakout groups, and because it's not clear until people actually accept the invites, who, you know, how the space is, so he'll be aiming for 3 in each group, but he might do a bit of juggling to just make sure that there's nobody on their own, etc. So maybe just give it a moment or two when you land into your groups, because you might be whisked into another group suddenly if there's more in one space than another.
Are we still going with 10 minutes, Becca?
No, I think we'll have slightly shorter. So give a minute to each person to speak. So we'll probably aim for about 6 minutes in total. So then there's a minute to speak and a little bit of dialogue time.
To really just open up. Yeah, I think the invitation now is just to open up the space in what we call a community of practice or fireside chat, really informal, and yeah, the space is open and the invitation is there for you to ask the questions that might feel a bit challenging and sticky. This is the space to do that. So yeah, if anyone would like to share, please do. Notice the nervous system as you sort of decide whether you'll share or not as well. Don't push in by mindfulness, people.
One way to do this might be to put something in the chat, and then we could...
Oh, we've got a hand up. We
Yeah,
do have
okay.
a hand up.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Thank you for having the courage to speak first, Divya. Well done to you. Give yourself a pat on the back. Much gratitude. Okay.
Thank you. It was thanks to you, actually. I felt comfortable too. I haven't framed this question beautifully, but one thing I'm aware of is these kinds of conversations can bring up shame, which, as we know, is not a helpful feeling or something that we want to trigger in people, but it can do. And I know with colleagues, clients, students, either they'll articulate that or you can sense that, you know, wherever you're coming at it from. And yeah, just any thoughts on, yeah, how we have, whether it's as facilitator in a group or amongst teachers or even in ourselves, how we get past that or hold that when we're having these explorations. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. And I think that's a really important question, because it's a phenomena that happens when we're looking at these topics. So really thank you for bringing that question to the table. And I'm conscious that we don't, you know, I'm not the one to answer. We can, as a community, if someone feels an aliveness about how to respond to that question, please also raise your hand and offer a sharing to the space. I mean, I think my personal view on that would be that I think it's one of the reasons why we ended up sort of introducing some of the terminologies, so that as mindfulness practitioners, we could just drop down a little bit deeper into how we come to know. And as soon as we kind of look at how we come to know, we realize that there's huge amounts we don't know. And there's huge amounts that we've come to know through contextual circumstances. And that is a real sense that I think when we understand that deeply, we can create space for each other's unknowings. And I think that that's what the container is about. When we looked at the resources and we looked at holding that safe container, really knowing that how we come to know I think the cognitive process as well is important of how we come to know and formulate our understanding. And once we know that of each other and ourselves, I think there is no need for shame. It's really just, there's a blind spot. You know, it's a little bit like when the mind goes off and it's like aha moment. You know, at first, I don't know if you're anything like me. At first, it's like, I'm no good at this meditation stuff, you know. And then someone said, but that's the aha moment, Dean. That's when you've realized that you've gone. And I think it's the same with kind of the challenges of shame, blame, and guilt. When we realize that, we can really just notice, there's a blind spot. That might be a part of something that I've got to still come to understand. And if we create this container and the space that allows for that unknowing to be okay and part of the implicit curriculum of learning from each other, shame, the energy, the hard energy of shame, blame, and guilt can be held, in my humble opinion, can be held compassionately. Someone's put, for me, this links powerfully with the work around trauma-informed mindfulness and the need as teachers, can't see the last bit, the need as teachers to be fundamentally open to what participants need rather than what we have been trained to deliver, and to be prepared to question all my preconceptions about what is needed and become more responsive and creative. Wow. Couldn't, sorry, I can't see who sent that, but Catherine Ware. Thank you, Catherine, for that contribution. And I think those words are really powerful. You know, it's about being aware of the assumptions we make as teachers, aware of the power that we have as teachers and the influence on the space, and working tenderly with that, and knowing, okay, we might get it wrong as well. One of the sayings we say is try again, fail again, and fail better. You know, there's no winning in this. It's about just constant unfolding of learning. And I think if the container allows that space, there is a limitation of the impact of the energy linked to shame, blame, guilt, resentment, and so forth. Does anyone else want to speak to that? Yes. And I can see Rebecca come in. Please do.
Yeah, thank you, Divya, for your question. And I just wanted to share some reflections around this, because I certainly is part of my own personal journey, is feeling guilt and shame around these themes. And I really appreciate Dean and Alesha, the way that you come at this, which is in a way that feels tremendously inclusive and honouring of all that's been before, because I can easily get into a space of think, oh gosh, you know, what we were missing, and you know how blinkered we were, and you know, just really recognizing my own sort of process over the years of finding my voice, and how unconfident I was to speak in public, just generally, and how that was a journey to be able to stand in my own shoes and own my own authority, and a woman in academia in a subject that's marginalized, and you know, kind of really finding my way into the space and feeling my voice, and then coming into these themes around, you know, inclusion and racial issues, and feeling like I've lost my voice, and like I've got nothing to say, nothing to contribute around this, and feeling sort of lost again, you know. So I mean, and actually recognizing that there's some value in that, in feeling that, and sensing the loss of power, and the loss of potency, but also really just so appreciating the way that you invite people back in, and the way you really sort of have this way of helping us all to see that we've all got a voice in this, and that this isn't work that any one group of us can do. It really takes every single one of us to step in, and it's takes courage, and I'm you know, and shame comes up for me, and that I'm also seeing that's okay. That's part of the process. Shame for my own, but also for you know, all that I've, you know, for my ancestors and all that you know, my you know, my own family were, you know, I'm privileged because my grandfathers and great grandfathers were part of the colonial system, and you know, that's in me.
Thank you for that honesty, Rebecca. And I think that's how we kind of tended to work together on this paper with a group of us. And yeah, I think we all have agency and voice. Would anyone else care to speak to that or have a different challenge or question? We can see, come in, Julia. Welcome to the space.
Hello. I want to thank you all. Yeah, hello, Alesha. Thank you all so much for this work, and really noticing how, although I'm very tired right now this evening, how enlivening this topic is, and exciting. My question is, I think it's a sort of curiosity practically of where this might go in terms of how curriculum might develop or teacher training might develop. I value your thoughts on that. One particular thought I'd had was how much my training orientated me to the specific kind of depression and anxiety kind of conditions I was trying to help, but also to a sense of common humanity, which I think is a real strength of the approach. But it wasn't a training or a way of looking that was particularly interested in difference. And so I'm interested, like whether a different teacher stance would bring out more richness with the same curriculum, or whether actually the curriculum itself could support inquiries that embrace perhaps more of the specificity of people's lives and challenges of different contexts that are coming together in the class or coming up, you know, in the class. So anyway, yeah, it's so interested in how this might develop in terms of curriculum and teaching skills.
Thank you, Julia. And again, we don't have the answers, you know, but we maybe have a view or an idea or an opinion. But I mean, one of the things that we did in the program that we created was the first elements of that was umoja and the spirit of togetherness. And we aligned that to the element of water, the fluidity of coming together. And I think that potentially, maybe with a collective energy, I think that there is room for facilitating teachers to develop more fluidity in the teaching. You know, I think the curriculum is very, very useful, but I think at some point, and we shouldn't forget as well, we are part of the curriculum as teachers. Our bodies in the space and how we present ourselves in that space is part of the curriculum. So as we transform potentially and our practice deepens and we change or we adapt, I'm sure the teaching will adapt. So I think, I think Alesha used the term mindfulness moving into maturity, and I think it matures with us as in our bodies as well, and in our hearts. And I think, yes, there's an encouragement to look at being more fluid and contextual, and yeah, but I'm also aware of the sort of potential for oneness and the bypass of difference, and we do, our strapline is embracing difference whilst connecting through our common humanity, which again feels like a both and approach. And when we recognize difference, it's a little bit like what Alesha was saying, diversity is a fact. Even if we think we're in a homogeneous group or we're all the same, it won't take very long before we start to find difference. And that difference is our beauty. And I think that difference is our ability, is what really feeds into our ability to do amazing things as humans, actually, because we've all got a little bit of a different way of doing it. I don't know if that helps, but yeah, great question. Great question. And may it still unfold. I can see hands up from Jenny and Vishrapani. Sorry, Vishrapani. Jenny, would you like to come in first? Is that okay?
Okay, thank you. I just want to say how much I really appreciate the concepts from African cultures that you've brought in and attached to the discussion that we're having about mindfulness, because I think we live in, and we're, you know, absorbed and infused by this dominant culture which sees us so much as separate from each other and from other living things, and that's so much at the root of many of the problems that we have about injustice and, you know, what's happening to our world that's so urgent and difficult to even acknowledge. And I wonder if, you know, there is space to bring in that diversity of understanding of us as humans in relation to each other and the world, that other cultures have far more imbued in them than our dominant culture, and the extent to which mindfulness is and can be a channel for that, because I think we've living in quite an impoverished sort of intellectual framing for who we are, which is not serving our values and not serving, as you said, our sort of creative power, if we really recognize the strength of what, you know, this wonderful diversity of humans and other creatures can all bring together that we can learn from. Sorry, that's a bit of a big question, but I feel that there's a lot of wisdom out there beyond our dominant culture that I really hope we can bring into our consciousness and work with.
Would you like to come in on that, anyone?
Yeah, I don't mind coming in here. Thank you, Jenny, for that. And I really appreciate the acknowledgement for bringing in different traditions, particularly as a learning tool and something that we can actually explore collectively. And really, it's interesting because Dean and I created the mindfulness-based inclusion training program, and we were really clear what we wanted to include so that it spoke to our own authenticity and our own cultural heritage. But what we didn't want to do was to just limit it there. Whilst we felt it important, we kind of used it as an example that also meant that others from other cultures and from different traditions and different identities could invite their own into the space as well. So it feels like we need a bit more courage to really say, this is part of me too. Or maybe there's part of our heritage that we have no idea about. I personally am of mixed heritage, and it feels important that I can explore and also say, I don't know everything about my heritage. So it invites others to bring into the space that says, mindfulness is part of the human condition. It doesn't belong to a particular culture. Whilst it's really important to acknowledge cultures that explicitly practice mindfulness, such as within Buddhism and Hinduism, it feels important to look at other cultures, other traditions across the globe that really do practice mindfulness, but maybe not under that name.
Could I just come in on that exact point there I was going to make? I'm chair of the Mindfulness Initiative, like international, the global network, and I deal with advocates or politicians in 50 different countries about mindfulness. And when I say the Eastern Eastern Buddhist philosophy and Western science, they say, what about the Southern perspective? And there is absolutely, you have a man like Freddie Ehlers, who was the minister for the wonderful good living, a minister for good living, who looked to the indigenous tribes in Ecuador and Peru. And much like Ubuntu, the we aspect that he knew his society was lacking. You look at the Lakota Indians, and Diane Reynolds is here. I'm not sure if the Welsh Assembly's future generations was influenced by that, but they have this 7th generation way of making decisions, not just them or their children or their grandchildren, but the way down. So these are in the indigenous people in Australia. I was told that they've had battles, they've had conflicts, but they've never had a war, and their connection, literal connection to the earth on walkabout. So this is could influence us as individuals, or if we practice together as groups or as a society, but also public policy. So it's a rich vein.
Very rich. Yeah, I really appreciate you adding to that as well, Chris, because it feels like there's so much there when others can speak. So it's like, wow, I didn't know that. Maybe that's the time I can use. Maybe that's something that I can explore as well. We start to learn about the world we're living in rather than come from just this paradigm of this is what it is. This is what mindfulness is. And we practice like this. Actually, what happens when we open and we're curious as to how we've all come to be? You know, what is running through our bones? What's here for us as a resource that we can really use to connect with others? So it feels like there's a whole curriculum out there that, you know, can really be dipped into and really in a real explorative way.
I'll just add to that as well that another teacher of ours and well-respected scholar at Birmingham University, I think, Callen-Davies, he says, the world is only as equal as the knowledge it's built upon. And I think it's the same with mindfulness. Mindfulness is only as equal as the knowledge it's built upon. So I think there's a responsibility and a sense of, well, maybe not duty, but a responsibility to enrich mindfulness with all of those good grounded wisdoms that you've invited to the space as well, Chris. So thank you for doing that, because naming it is really important. And you know, is it Hokusai says there's no end to seeing, Jenny? You know, we're going to just keep looking and keep finding new wisdoms, new traditions. You know, they say mindfulness is innate. It's innate in a human being. So it must have been here when the first human beings were here, and it will continue to be here as long as human beings are here. It's just, how does it show up? And it's about finding the ways and marrying those ways that you've been talking about so beautifully, Chris. So thank you. And that's the invitation, really. We want to be, the other thing I say is, as soon as we're certain about something, we can be almost certain that we're missing something else. So, you know, it's not about being drilled down into one way. It's opening out to life itself and the full catastrophe. Yeah, thank you. And come in, Vishrapani.
Okay, yeah. So there's I'd like to have a go at naming attention, which I don't hear very much in these sorts of spaces. But I felt it quite strongly reading the paper, most of which I really loved, and I've really loved your open, inquiring, curious way of presenting material. But it rests on a critique of society, or at least that's an element of it, which is familiar from the social sciences, seeing society as a system of oppression and violence and so on. And in fact, the paper says it's our ethical responsibility to see society in that way. So the other context I bring in is the context of culture war. And what that means is there are a lot of people, and actually I'm not really one of them, but I'm aware that there are many people who don't accept that view of society. They fundamentally reject it. In other words, there's left-wing perspective and there's right-wing perspectives. And so in the Mindfulness Initiative, for example, that started with a cross-party group you know, that includes Conservatives and Labour people and Lib Dems and so on. So the tension I want to name is about politicizing or about taking a particular stance in a culture war. And I'm quite interested in standing back. I feel that the culture war is the reality to which I want to bring mindfulness. And I'm concerned about taking a polarized stance within that culture war. Yeah. So can we have right-wing mindfulness teachers? Yeah. I mean, and if not, what does that mean? What are we saying? You know, you're saying it's an ethical responsibility to accept, you know, quite a complicated view of society in teaching mindfulness. Well, is it? I mean, can you really ask that of mindfulness teachers? So these are the more fundamental questions I had about the paper, even though I don't want to be in a white mindfulness world. You know, I don't want that. And a middle-class mindfulness world. I really want us to embrace the lessons diversity that you're saying. And yet I have these questions.
Like we described that as Viswarapani is putting on a nice warm log to warm up the space here.
Yeah.
And thank you, because it's quite toasty actually.
Yeah.
And it's so you know, there's probably not enough time to unpack that, but what I would say to you, what's alive for me at the moment in response to that is we can't have left without right.
Mm-hmm.
They make each other. And that's that both and scenario again, is that we as individuals, I guess we can choose if we want to go. There is a left and a right, as you say. There is a politicizing of everything. I mean, we are political beings, right? As far as I know, if I don't go and vote, I'm in a bit of trouble. It affects my credit score and everything. So we're all politicized beings. So we can't kind of avoid that. And we are forced down that road in a structure. So, but I really like this idea of, can we take a back view and see it all? And I think that that's possible. I think that is an invitation, but there is also a reality that says whether we take the left road or the right road, we are creating something. And there is, which is why a key part of what we do is embeds axiology, the moral and ethical framework for our practice. And we ask ourselves, and everyone will be different. You know, some people might want to eradicate the right. Let's call it that. And I say that the right gives us work to do. So don't go anywhere. You know, because it's that mud and lotus thing again. Without the mud, there can not be any lotus, you know. So it sometimes the left is going to be the nutrient source of the right's blossoming, and sometimes the right is going to be the nutrient source of the left's blossoming. So it is, in my opinion. And I don't think there is a solution that we can say, oh, we step back and be out of it, because I think our silence or our distance can also, sometimes there's that saying, silence is violence, right? Can also be a part of the problem. So even if we speak out and we're talking from the right or the left, make that welcome, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Thank you so much. I really want to hand over to Diana as well, and because it'd be great to hear from you on this theme. But I guess there's just one piece, so that I really welcome what you're saying, Viswarapani. I think this is such an important conversation, because it's about inclusion as well, isn't it? But one of the things that I just very briefly want to say before handing to Diana is that the ethical piece that we were aiming to name in the paper was around that this practice is about non-harming, and we need to be seeing where the inadvertent harm is happening. So it was about really recognizing that that by not including, by creating spaces that are not inclusive, we're inadvertently creating harm. So there's a sort of ethical responsibility to engage there. Diana, it'd be really great to hear from you on this theme.
Thank you so much. I've done this thing, you know, where you put your hand up because you think you should, and then you're not quite sure what you're going to. Anyway,
Could I spotlight you, Diana?
Oh my goodness!
No, all right, I won't do that. I won't do that. Fine, fine.
No, you're very welcome to. It's absolutely fine. I mean, obviously, so just to clarify, those who don't know, I'm a civil servant, so I have no political opinions, and I you know, support no political parties. I work for whichever political parties become the power in the country in which I work, and you know, it's a great honour and a delight and a pleasure to be able to do that. But I am, you know, the point raised is a really, I mean, it's a great log, as Dean says, it's a great log for the fire. And I want to point out some of the things that we're noticing. So we're noticing that both left and right can reject the view of society as being oppressive and violent, and at the same time being accusing it of being oppressive and violent, even though we're also appearing to deny it in the next sentence. So it's a very mixed picture is something I want to paint here. There's a lot of difference in there. Both the left and the right can, through taking this particular stance, I mean, it is an and stance, it's an and as well stance, but it's an and as well negative sort of stance, you know, a pessimistic stance, if you like. And that can lead people down a thread of conspiracy theories even. So it can lead people in some very dark corners. And so I think the work that Vishwapani is talking about is very important, that we try to contact and listen to and be with people before they fall into, you know, what can lead. I mean, we know that we've had people in Wales, for example, who've even killed themselves because they've been so distressed by the things that they've been learning. So you know, true or otherwise. So I think it's very important work to be done, and I'm very happy to talk about the work that I do with anybody who's going to engage in that work, in case there's a learning that we can share between us. You know, there'll be learning in both directions, but you know, I'm very happy to do that. I guess I should, while I'm here, mention the Wellbeing Future Generations Act. So just to say, Chris, yes, we talk to Indigenous people from several different places, as I recall, in terms of trying to understand other ways of being in order to inform the Act. And the Act itself had all party agreement, so it's not a political thing, it's an act of a government, but it stands as a context and a framework for everything the Wales does. And the thing that I wanted to say about it actually harks back to something that Alesha said earlier on, because when we talk to our auditors in Wales about the Act, what they try to explain to us is that what you're supposed to be doing is dancing towards the Act. You know, you won't be there yet, but we want you to dance towards it. And then occasionally what you'll find is you're stepping on somebody's toe. And if that happens, it's a misstep and you must just pause. It's an opportunity to pause, because it's, you know, obviously exhausting to dance all the time. So you take a moment and you look and you see, well, how can we dance that little bit again, but without me stepping on your toe? And this is, you know, I think speaks to a lot of what we've been saying today. And it's just such a beautiful way. And isn't it amazing that an auditor can tell you that that's the way to look at life? So yes, that's it. That's what I have to say. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. This is such beautiful work. I'm so grateful.
Thank you for that log. I think you've add more warmth to the space. It's couldn't articulate it better. And I think, you know, I'm really curious about the Future Generations Act and how that's going to unfold. I think it's such an important initiative. Yeah, such wisdom in the room, right? That's the value of holding this kind of space and saying, look at the wisdom, listen to the wisdom. What can we learn? And there is so much to learn.
It would be so great, Diana, to have a follow-up session and hear more from the work that you're doing. I know, because I know you're really in this territory. But yeah, I think that would be tremendous. And I feel
very happy to keep talking and conversing, particularly in this way. And I have put my website into the sidebar in case anybody wants to have a look at what we're up to.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah. Feel
So-
really, really tantalized by the reality that we've only got 2 minutes to our closing time. And we're, you know, there's so much depth, and it would be so great to, but I also feel the importance of honoring what, you know, the time boundary of what we said we would when we said we would end. So I'm sort of thinking that we need to bring it towards a closure. Is that where you're at, Dean and Aisha and Rob?
Yeah, I would just say thank you for inviting us to dance. And if we've treaded on toes, you know, we get it wrong. And I love that analogy. And that's why it takes all of us. I thank you so much for your contributions. And that's what it's about. That's why humility is so important. Thank you.
Yeah, really big thanks. And I really appreciate the questions, and I could feel the bubbling. Oh, I want to say something as well, but also appreciating the space and sharing actually. But I really want to invite, if it's okay, we did have a reflection for you, but I'm wondering if it's something that could be taken away. So whilst we have the paper, whilst we have the resources, really acknowledging and seeing perhaps as a personal reflection, how it's truly landed for you. If there are any more questions opening up for you, and really just seeing, you know, what can we do as a result, as a result of reading this paper, now as a result of coming together, even having this conversation? What can we continue to do? Because if there are changes that we feel are within our power, we have the ability to allow them to come into fruition. So what can we do? So it's really a question for you, and oil contemplation. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have answers, but when we are looking at social change, when we are looking at inclusion, equity, making space for others, I really invite you to allow this to be a continuous exploration, to dance and to step on toes. That's okay, you know, but really kind of like share it with others, because even the questions around shame, etc., it's a clear understanding there is no shame without others. You know, it is a social act always. So, but what's really close to even that energy is a sense of care. When we feel shamed, it's because we care. So remembering that there's always a thread to compassion as well. And it means that we are in continuous social connection. So just honoring all of you. Soyubona. Thank you.
Soyubona.
Sawubona. Yeah, thank you all. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Yeah, and you know, we're going to stay, we'll linger in the space. So if any of you, you know, have got follow-up reflections, questions, we'll still be here for a little while longer. But if, for those of you, you know, there may well be people who need to leave at the time that you expected it to end. So yeah, so formally closing, but any, you know, informal flow from this is also welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becca.